I'm Doug Osborne. My background's in pharmaceuticals, and then very strange gear change. I went into the music business, which eventually led me into the world of psychology and well-being, mental health. And probably in the kind of last of these careers, the third one, my experience really is I've worked at Roehampton University. I lecture in counselling psychology. And I've been a consultant to the Fire Brigade across the South East and South West to all the counties really for about 20 years. There was a big report that the government had asked for about 2 years ago called the Stevenson Farmer Report, which showed that most industries are still very much suboptimal in terms of their approach to well-being, and that some of the kind of old school approaches to kind of people in the workplaces, you don't flog people to death. You kind of give people support, and actually, if you retain people and allow people to be in a kind of an optimal setting, then you'll get much more out of them. They're happier, so they perform well. Think about air traffic control at peak times. You've got thousands of aircraft taking off, people milling around. We don't give it a second thought. And well-being is like that in some ways, because mostly we cope very well. Occasionally there's a hiccup and all of a sudden air traffic control is in the spotlight. And it's a bit like that for our well-being. We'll notice that something's up because the normal, very complex ways of managing suddenly come onto our radar. The boiled frog is an interesting metaphor for well-being. I want to assure you I've never boiled a frog. It's said that if you take a frog and pop him in tepid water and you gently begin to heat the water, the frog doesn't notice the small incremental changes in temperature, and eventually poor little thing will just go to sleep and it'll end up being its demise. For us as human beings, we're very similar. So we won't notice, say over the course of a year, small incremental increases in the demands on us. We just adjust, and then we adjust and we adjust. But obviously all the time that's happening, we're beginning to strip resources from ourselves, all sorts of different resources. And at some point, those resources will come to their end, a bit like the frog. We can go to fight, flight or freeze. The way that shows up in humans in sort of a modern day commercial setting would be, say for example, fight would be, you're kind of taking a piece out of yourself, on the way home from the office, because you didn't do that right, or you forgot that, or you overlooked that, or you didn't say the right thing there. So you kind of attack yourself. Something like freeze can show up around the kind of quality of your higher brain thinking. As we begin to have more and more pressure on us, the higher brain thinking, if we're going into freeze, begins to stall. So if you think of very complex stuff of things that are kind of relational, like leadership in business, it can begin to fog, how we approach those things. If you take flight, for example, I've seen flight show up in many different ways. Flight can show up in not physically wanting to be present, it's the simplest form, but it may show up in a much more sophisticated way, which is where you'll want to kind of avoid a topic, or there'll be some sort of place you don't want to put yourself, whether that's metaphorical or real. Really, it's the antidote to time travelling, what I call time travelling, which is where you go forward to try and risk assess and figure out where all the pitfalls are, or you go backward in time to try and kind of reassess what you did to see, how that played out. A difficulty with time travelling is, in our mind, our nervous system can barely tell the difference between reality and imagination, and you can test that out. If you're just before lunchtime, imagine your food in your head, even before you've actually got any in front of you, and your body will start to respond just as though the food's really there. So what mindfulness is about is trying to get you present, so you're time travelling, you're neither past or future, you're in the present, and in that place, what we're doing is we're keeping our brain activity, if you like, kind of in the higher brain, where you've got capacity to, strategically think, to plan, to be dynamic, which is very important, especially, things like leadership, all the kind of higher human activities, relational stuff, really does need that part of the brain to be online as much as possible.